Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I wanted to chat with you guys a little bit about further evidence and looking at things so that people can really understand that when we say size equals strength, that really isn't subject to that much debate. It really isn't. Because when you start looking at records like in actual drug tested sports where they are heavily drug tested, I'm not saying that means natural, that doesn't mean drug free, it just means they're heavily tested, which limits what they can use. In other words, if you're subject to WADA testing, it doesn't mean you're clean. It just means you're probably not abusing large amounts of drugs. It's almost impossible to do so. They have to be very, very careful how they cheat. There's a lot of science behind it, and they're very, very limited in what they can do. So it's considerably cleaner. And when we say that size equals strength, usually the things that skew those numbers are going to be height and they're going to be drug abuse. In other words, when you see someone who you look at their body weight, their muscle mass, and they're disproportionately weak on big lifts, and they're still really, really jacked, that's usually indicative of pretty heavy abuse of anabolics while specifically not training heavy on big lifts. And in other words, we see massive drug abuse that causes strength in untested sports. But if people were to use those exact same substances and train completely different and abuse large amounts, they tend to grow muscle without a proportionate amount of strength. And there's actually been studies looking at that they did find that people who abuse anabolics as their primary mechanism of hypertrophy do have less strength per ounce of muscle on their body. Their muscles don't contract quite as hard. But what we do find, though, is that the guys who really and truly train for strength and do that, they do get crazy strong. They get crazy strong. You need to look no further than Larry Wheels, Jamie Lewis, any of those guys. Those guys all train super heavy, and they are strong. But again, when we go over to naturals, it seems to be that height seems to be one of the biggest factors. Now, people will say, well, there's these genetic outliers, there's these freaks. Well, the thing is, the freaks are the ones who are setting these records, though. And when freak genetics, right, when we look at freak genetics, guess what? When you compare freak to freak, it goes back to the size equals strength again. In other words, the people who have the most gifted leverages, they have the best muscle fiber distribution that gives them a small advantage, they're all there. And the people say, well, I know this one example of this guy and he weighs this amount and lifts this weight. Well, it's on one lift. If it's on one lift and they're doing it outside of competition, how do you know it's real? Meaning when we start looking at totals, it balances out because people have different leverages. Some people who are extremely good at bench press suck at the deadlift and vice versa. It has to do with lever links, limb links, things like that relative to your frame affect those lifts tremendously. But when you have to do all three lifts, a squat, bench, and deadlift, it becomes completely normalized. And so I might suggest to you guys, when you see people breaking world records in the gym, I'm just going to throw this out there. If people are hitting near world records or breaking world records in the gym for their weight, you might want to factor in that it could be fake or that they only train half of their body or both. Don't assume that it's real when they're using gym plates. That would be a big, big mistake because there's a lot of fakery out there. So if you're like, well, this guy benches 500 pounds at this body weight, well, is anyone confirmed that it's real? All right, these are calibrated plates with judges watching and making sure they can't cheat on the lifts or anything else. I mean, it's like you see some guy do something with knee wraps in the gym. How do you know he didn't put tennis balls inside those knee wraps? That used to be done in powerlifting meets, so guys got caught doing it. Guys could cheat knee wrap lifts all day long, even with real plates in the gym. You don't know unless it's been in a stricter environment. But when we look at these charts, let's go down and look at the difference. You start looking at those totals. This is raw. Right, this is no knee wraps. Now knee sleeves out a little bit. This is no elbow wraps, any of this BS. No squat suits, bench shirts, any of that. This is raw. These guys are all tested after this. So if they were on drugs, they probably weren't on anything at the time of these competitions because usually when these guys break records, they're tested immediately. They go through immediate drug testing. And again, that's not indicative of it. But look at the totals. Every single weight class, the world record totals are higher. There is a direct correlation between their body weight and the world record total in drug tested and off-season drug tested powerlifting. Like you go right there from the 59 kilo, it's 669. The 66 kilo, it's 688. And some of them, you notice like the They're the 10 kilo weight jumps. They're exactly 20 kilos difference in the total in some of those. There's a direct, extreme correlation between body weight and world record totals. Why is that? Because size equals strength. You can't move weight without muscle hypertrophy. Muscle has weight. Now, what you will also probably find, what I think is interesting, you have the weight and then you have the strength there. I think you will also find that certain heights tend to be in the different weight classes, meaning the guys get proportionately taller as you go up through the weight classes also. Because what we do know is that there's going to be an ideal height range for any given weight class also to compete at the world level. It doesn't mean you can't go to national level. If you're 3 inches too tall or too short for your class, you might do just fine at the national level. But when you start getting up to the world level, the guys all tend to be around the same height and the same weight class. Why? Because the shorter you are, the less muscle you need to lift the same amount of weight. In other words, actually, the shorter you are, the less strength you need to move a given amount of weight. Now, that's a big one for people to grasp. Like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you've got to look at leverage differences and distance moved. In other words, benching 400 pounds, 12 inches is easier than benching the same weight 18 inches, right? When you start trimming range of motion down, there's less work done. In other words, it doesn't require as much strength. Strength is the production of force against an external object. Well, it takes less force to move a weight a shorter distance. All right, so the shorter guys have an advantage. The bigger guy, the taller guys with the bigger frames, even the longer arms, longer legs, have the advantage of being able to have more total strength. They can produce more force because they have a bigger frame to put more muscle mass on. Therefore, more muscle mass equals more strength. But they might have to move the weight a further distance. Now, the problem you run into, people would say, well, then the shorter guy should always win. No, not true. Because at a certain threshold, they just don't have enough muscle mass. Meaning you get into some of these higher weight classes, you start getting into 93 kilo, right? That's just over 200 pounds. It is very, very difficult to be 205 if you are 5'6" and have a mostly muscle frame and have an ideal body composition. You would require drugs. In other words, how many 5'6" guys do you see who are a lean 200 pounds without using insane amounts of drugs, right? They have to abuse drugs. They have to. Your frame won't hold enough muscle without them. So you're going to be limited by muscle mass depending on height. Now, pound for pound, you're going to be stronger. In other words, if you were to take the guy over here, say the 120 kilo guy, and he were to diet all the way down to 83 kilos, he would be weaker than Brett Gibbs. Why? Because Brett Gibbs would have more muscle stacked into a more dense frame and have to move the weight a shorter distance. So even if they had the same amount of muscle on their frame, well, the other guy's got a bigger skeleton, so that's going to be a couple pounds because he's taller. So you figure Brett's going to have a couple pounds of muscle on him already because, again, he has less frame and stuff to worry about to account for it. And he's moving the weight a shorter distance, so he's going to crush him. But as you notice, the reason they're different for weight class further on and height matters more is that the taller guys can stack more muscle on their frame. The shorter guy will be limited in the total pounds of muscle that he can put on his frame. Even a 7-foot tall guy can only add so much muscle without drugs to his frame. But his total muscle is going to be higher than the guy who's 5'5" once they both have maxed out their potential. So the height matters in regards to the body weight also because it's a total amount of muscle. And that's what it comes down to. When we say size equals strength, we mean a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. Now, different people have different leverages. You might be better at bench press than your friend with slightly smaller pecs because you have better insertions and levers. So therefore, even though his pecs might be slightly stronger than yours, you have a better angle advantage. But you might find another lift where he crushes you. And it also could have to do with the height. If you're 3 inches shorter than him, pound for pound, you're probably going to be stronger than him. But if he were to max his potential out, he's probably going to beat you because his frame will simply hold more size and more weight and more muscle mass. So, but when you look at these, when you start looking at the records where it's the best of the best, you'll find, again, there's a direct correlation. In other words, The bigger guys lift heavier weights all the way around across their total. Might not be on each individual lift, but when we start combining multiple lifts together to assess their overall strength, the biggest guys have the most strengths when they are not allowed to abuse large amounts of drugs. Right? The drugs make all the difference. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.